and we're super excited to kick off our year of lectures with Mr. Mike Katco. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. I'd like you to introduce you to the Historical Society's new educator, Mackenzie, who's going to give a nice introduction. We're excited to have Mackenzie with us to put together this lecture series and keep bringing great content to us up here in Los Alamos.
Good evening, and thank you for that very nice introduction. I just want to talk a little bit about our presenter tonight, Mike Katco. Mike is truly a man of many talents. He has spent over 20 years as an educator. He's actually an award-winning teacher and principal. Not only that, he's been a sergeant in the United States Air Force. He was a construction worker. He is a restaurant owner, was a restaurant owner, and a home builder. He lives here in Los Alamos with his wife Debbie and their dog Lola. And to add to his impressive list of accomplishments, Mike is also pursuing a writing, speaking, and consulting career. And it's worked pretty well for him. Not only did he debut his novel, he was actually a finalist of the New Mexico Book Award in the Trade Book of Non-Illustrated category. So that is very impressive. And we do have copies of his book in the back. It is titled Big Medicine and Pretty Water. It was inspired by his great-grandmother. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Mike Katco, everybody. I hope you enjoyed this presentation.
Good job, good job. Really well done. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate you coming out. I want to thank the Historical Society, Todd Nichols, Mackenzie, who you just met, Amy Justice, Don Cavness, Rebecca Collingsworth, Christy Hollis, if she's still here, and Sherry and Leslie are here, and we're old friends. Liz May, who provided the music, was a past director. The fellow veterans that are in the room, and longtime friends. I think Phil Dabney showed up, Mike and Pam Hannaford, Ron and Bob Barter, Jenny Neal, of course Mitzi and Jameson up here, Marvin and Kim, and Sam. I think Sam's here. And secondly, I'd just like to begin, tell you how honored and humbled I am that I am with this great spirit that fills this room right now, and what it brought us all together. To come here and fill this space with such wonderful friends, I just thank you so much. So, I am Mike Katco. I am from Wilma and Joe and Elvira and Max and John and Mary and the ancestors whose blood and DNA live in me today. I'm from places like Zaragoza, Spain, Marysville, California, Wichita Falls, Texas, Cheyenne, Wyoming, Denver, Colorado, and many towns in New Mexico. I'm from the Rocky Mountains, bone-chilling snow blizzards, rampaging tornadoes, lands of the relentless sun, and perfectly still long summer nights. I'm from pots of pinto beans on the stove, fried potatoes, homemade tortillas, RC Cola, Kool-Aid, Frisbees, footballs, black and white TV, phonographs, real cowboys and real cowgirls, and rodeos. I'm from the steelworkers back east, coal miners, farmers, maids, soldiers, car mechanics, alcoholics, the milkman, and hearing the phrase, fall down on your knees and be thankful for everything that God has given you. Those many kind and generous relatives sprinkled throughout my world's journey. From coyotes, field mice, lizards, snakes, chlorine-filled pools, the Milky Way, pocket knives, the muddy Rio Grande, mom's family speaking Spanish, dad's family speaking Hungarian. I'm from baby Jesus, Christmas carols, and you dress up for church, and we pray before meals. From giants like Martin Luther King Jr., John F. Kennedy, Cesar Chavez, and Muhammad Ali. from eating out once a week, belly holding laughter, being told to go outside and play, and where we would make up our own fun. From Dad saying, "You banged your head against the wall, boy." And "Whatever you say, John Alden," and "Up your bucket." And Mom pointing with her lips, "Give me the thing." And I knew exactly what she wanted. I am from banana seat bikes, 57 Chevys, landing on the moon, Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, Carlos Santana, the Beatles, hippies, and the Vietnam War death, the death count being shown on TV every night. From catching the love of reading from Dick and Jane, Dr. Seuss, The Red Badge of Courage, The Light in the Forest, Rudyard Kipling, and to the loss of my spiritual innocence after reading The Diary of Anne Frank, To Kill a Mockingbird, and Richard Brautigan's famous Trout Fishing in America, which wasn't really about trout fishing. And how in such a short time the television and computers have crippled our world of imagination. The playground lessons of sharing, and how those things have driven the children indoors, away from the parks, the sun, and the simple fun of rolling in the grass. And from a whole cast of men and women from the Great Depression and World War II, looking out for each other and going dancing Friday and Saturday nights, cheek to cheek. And after high school, how the whole landscape of the whole world was laid out before me. This is the spirit that goes into my writing. And this is what's carried me to this special place today. I'm going to kind of broad stroke a few topics today I've read and heard about while living here in Pajarito, Pajarito Plateau. I spread out some books that I did some research on for this presentation. The saddles here are pretty interesting, provided by Don Cavanis, and he brought that over from the archives. The first one is from, the first one on the left as you walk up to it is Peggy Pond Church's actual saddle. She used that probably in 1914. And then the one next to it we found, or Don found, that's the actual ranch school. The kids use them, the boys use those on their horsebacks. On horseback, they would travel up to the Via and back in the summer, and they use those all the time. Each kid got their own horse when they came up here to go to school, and they would use those saddles. And it's pretty interesting, pretty good history. And so I'll be talking about the Pajarito Plateau, and I want some time talking about the ancient ones, the bird people, the Pajarito, that means little bird, for whom the plateau is named. The hunter-gatherers, those hunter-gatherers who came here 1100 BC. And the war years that basically took place September 1st, 1939 to September 2nd, 1945. White Rock, New Mexico, how did it get there? The Valle Caldera, and many colorful characters and stories not written really in historical records. And for you serious historians, you'll have to grit your teeth, because I will be going a little heavy on the lower part of this presentation. Los Alamos, to me, has been one of the most colorful small towns I've ever experienced in my whole life. The history here, the people here that have done, there's stories everywhere. Everywhere I turn, I hear of this and that about this town and growing up here. So this is the Pajarito Plateau, which started 1.2 million years ago. And the first human arrival was about 1100 BC, and they started one of the areas was in Bandelier, and the Pueblo life. This is a picture of Tenuani, and that's the ruins, just ruins now, but in 1100 BC, this is the artist's depiction of what it might have looked like, and and I forget how many people lived there at one time, which was amazing. And they think, we have someone who knows how many? 4,000. 400, like I said. Okay. Okay, thank you. And then, of course, we have the nomadic tribes. Now, what's interesting that I found out about the nomadic tribes, the Navajo Nation was basically how it started, headquartered, basically, in Monument Valley. And they spread, they would go out, they would wander, follow the migrations of all the different deer and whatever was going. They would travel and follow them. The eastern edge of the Navajo tribe was what Mount Blanca is now, which is by Fort Garland, Colorado. And then the Comanche, they ran in the plains, and they would come as far as mostly Mount Blanca. And then the Apache were spread out in the southern part of the state, the southern part of Arizona. The Chiricahua, a famous tribe, is down there, Geronimo's tribe. And then up north are two different, basically, Apache tribes around Dulce in that area, Chama. And then north of that is Ute. The Ute were on the western edge of Colorado. And they would roam. And some of these roaming tribes ended up here. And then, it started around 1900, these are the tracts of the homesteaders who came up, and they cleared these tracts of land. And I should have grabbed a pointer, Todd. But anyway, this here is the golf course area, that up there. And the interesting, that's all right, I don't need it now. And the golf course area, they had, there's an interesting story. AEC was given the contract, and Norris Bradbury at that time had to put his stamp on anything that happened here. And so there were some guys, and I'd rather not say their names, but one was a sheriff, one was a heavy equipment operator, and two others were hangers-on and drank beer with the other two guys. And they were going to build the road for the golf course. This is a story, this isn't in any records, but the sheriff had shared it, and now everybody knows. Anyway, if you go to the golf course and you look down fairways 8 and 9, those ones that come up from east towards west, towards the golf course headquarter place there. If you look out there, you can see, now why did they bend the road way out that way to the left as you're looking? Well, these guys wanted the contract. One of them was heavy equipment operator. They wanted the contract, and Norris didn't give it to them, gave it to a different company for the AC. So they went out there drinking one night, and they were having a couple beers, and they decided that, you know what, let's move these stakes. They had just staked the road out, and the road was supposed to go straight right through there. Well, they took the stakes and just moved them to where you see the road going now, because the next day the plow came and there goes the road. And then they put the base course, and then they put the other course on there, and then the manager of the whole outfit came out. What are you guys doing? It was too late to change by then, and it went way over budget, and they got their revenge. And that's kind of that story that's kind of like hidden amongst people that live here now that kind of heard about it. And then there was the ranch school years. Now, this has to be, I wish I lived back then, because there was just, this is the big house that got torn down. And originally, A.J. Connell, Edward Fuller Sr., Ashley Pond, and Samuel Bemis came up there and they built this new cabin. And they wanted it to be a hunting lodge. And they figured that they could get some hunters from back east and just come up here and hunt like crazy and make lots of money. That didn't happen. So what Ashley Pond came up with was a ranch school. And they decided to build a ranch school for boys. And they got the funding from Edward Fuller Sr., and he was the one who funded that program. And so they started the ranch school in 1917. And this is just a depiction of the life they lived back then. This is the lodge on the top left corner, and they're going out hunting, and you can see one dog. They had a bunch of dogs. Kids were allowed to bring their own dogs if they wanted, and they could go, and the dog would be with them. The boys would go from this porch. The boys lived on the back porch. They slept and that was their cot year round. They believed in, A.J. Connell believed in fresh air was what would cure almost anything. And so, and they're going out camping there in that picture. And so it was an idyllic life, I think. And let me see. So in 1928, Fuller hired John Galmim to design this building. It was 771 hand-picked logs, if you look here. And the chinking in between it is these little strips that go in between the bigger logs. That's from aspen trees. And they cut them and put that in there. And then it's coated with, and I forget the chemical, but it was chemical back then, that's still on there, which is pretty amazing. It's still on there. And it's what gives it that reddish brown color. So it's just amazing what they did back then. Now, the woodcut design, if you look at I have it in the back, they made these handkerchiefs, and they're really big. I have one spread up here. But the woodcut design on those were designed by Gustav Baumann, a woodcut that he designed himself and put on those things. They had them on all the shirts and all kinds of stuff, which is a pretty neat little piece of history to know. He's a really famous woodcut artist. And then one employee for the ranch school was Edith Warner, who became friends with Peggy Pond Church, later Church, Ashley Pond's daughter. And she was paid $35 a month to receive the mail down at the Ottawee Crossing. And there was a car there, and that was called the Ottawee Crossing. And it's where the Chili Line ran. And the Chili Line was an old steam train, and it ran out of Santa Fe in the turn of the century up to 1941. And it would come through out of Santa Fe, down through Ottawee, cross across Ottawee. At one time, there were 3 crossings at Ottawee, around Ottawee. There was the train bridge, there was a car bridge, and then there was a sheep bridge. Because at one time in the valley, there were over 100,000 head of sheep. And most of them were owned by a guy named Boyd. And he would hire the farmers to come and move those sheep. And if you try and get 100,000 sheep across a road, you'll be there forever. So they built a sheep bridge, and it's completely gone now. And the Buckman Crossing, of course, is gone also. But 26 years as a school. Now, the other thing, too, is Ashley Pond's daughter, Peggy Pond, she was kind of a tomboy, big time. And when he built the school, he decided that it would only be for boys. Man, she was mad. And she never forgave him for that. And her brother got to go to the school, but she never did. And she loved coming here and staying here. So that's kind of the life they lived back then. And so in 26 years as a ranch, the LA Ranch Outdoor School for Boys, and they wanted to build a sound mind and a healthy body, fresh air, sleeping porches, and a healthy diet, a diet ahead of its time. Lots of water. The boys were told to drink lots of water, eat whole grains, fresh vegetables, fruit, and were cautious with meat and dairy back then, which is pretty unusual. An educational philosophy based on John Dewey's principles of a mastery of manual skills and tools that educated the whole person. Boys participated in hours of community work, building ranch school structures and caring for horses and working the farm. And then every once in a while, they got to go to the Valle Grande and look at that place. That's one of the best shots I've seen in the Valle Grande back then. There's no roads. You can't see any roads. And the Highway 4 travels back up here. Across. No road there yet. Wagon trails back then, maybe. And boys participated hours. Now, back in the Navajo, I'll go back to if you let me go back to the Navajo Nation. What they would do is in the summer, they found out that they would like to come out here and roam. And one of the best ways, one of the best areas to go through was the Valle Grande and Valle Toledo. There's a trail there called the Navajo Trail, and it's not in this picture, but they would travel there and then go down Santa Clara Canyon and raid the pueblos. But they wouldn't take everything. And they would take some horses, some mules, and leave the rest so they could come and do it again next year. When they would raid just different pueblos, not all of them at one time, but few, and then head back. Now there is a story about Kearney, General Kearney, who was roaming then. He was sent as a detachment, and he was said to build a mini fort up around in the via underneath Rio, in the via, and he waited for them to come and attack them and wiped them out, and they changed that practice of going through the via after that. Now I've read that in one of the books, and no one's backed it up, no one said it didn't happen, no one said it could have happened. But that's one of the other stories that the historians in the group are gonna probably pick through me here. And then the other thing that happened is, of course, and this was a neat story I heard face to face with a Mr. Gomez when he was growing up. His dad took him and his uncle and took him and the sheep up through Santa Clara Canyon. Now, a while ago, before the big fire and the big flood through Santa Clara Canyon, they used to take the sheep up that way, and you could stop halfway, and there were 3 ponds. I mean, Leslie probably remembers them, but you go up there and you go camping, and I mean, it was like an oasis up there. These 3 big ponds, you catch crawfish, hear the frogs chirping all night long, and it was just beautiful. And they would stop there and let the horses rest, and let the mules rest, and let the sheep rest, and then push on into the via, out in there. And these were all sheep herders that were hired by Boyd. And they were farmers, subsistence farmers. Almost everything was subsistence then. And this is the turn of the century, right? Not the last century. And so they would get the seed in the ground, get everything going, and then the moms and the sisters and the littler brothers would go and weed while the seed is taking root. And then they would take the sheep. And Boyd would give them money to take some sheep. And they would go up to the via in that path, that way. And Mr. Gomez says he remembers, and this guy was like 80, 89, 90 maybe, back then around 2000. He's since passed. But he told me that his uncle and his dad took him up that way with the sheep. And they got up there, and at evening time, the sheep would just kind of hang out. And he said his uncle had the most beautiful voice he'd ever heard. He sang on Christmas Eve in church. And he would start singing to the sheep. And the littlest sheep would come up and just lay down around them just as he was singing. So you can imagine what that must have been like. And then you could see, he said, you could see all the other sheep herders in their little flocks and the fires all over the via as the sun set. So what a beautiful place. I just love that memory. Now, there's another story. And I got this from a historian in the area, but I won't mention his name. But he was saying that there was a crash in 1947 of a C-45. And this was early June of that 45 summer where they built the bomb. And June and July were probably the most hectic times up here, they said. They were blowing up things, everything was moving, the men were back and forth. And then right before they blew up Trinity, all the men left. And nobody knew what was going on. Well, at that time when everything was going on, they used to bring there was a intricate little FBI guys that would bring the little pellets of uranium-235, and they would have these FBI guys dressed up in civilian clothes, and they had these gold-lined, nickel-plated things like as big as coffee cups, and they would put them in a briefcase, and the briefcase was chained to one of the FBI guys, and he would get on the chain out in Oak Ridge and ride out. And then they had 2 or 3 guys on the train with him. Well, during that hectic period, they'd get those little pieces of uranium. That's how they got them here for the longest time. And during that hectic time, there was a big rush to, we got to blow this up to see if this will work. Let's see if this works. Let's see if this works. And they were saying that one of these planes crashed in the via, carrying one of these little things. And there was a little blurb in the Albuquerque Journal, 1945, plane crash in the Via Grande. That's all it said, and that's the last you heard of the crash. So kind of a neat little piece of history there. And I don't know who found the uranium-235 because they probably didn't live very long if they found it. And then this is Edward Philo Fuller. He's one of the original masters and boys teacher at the lodge. Now, he was born with polio. He got polio as a boy, so he was partially crippled, and he had a very bad speech impediment. But the kids loved him, and he was a great, great teacher. And so he died in 1923 while he was an instructor here. And in 1928, that's when they built this place. That's when they put together all the logs and everything and named it after him because that's how much they loved him. And so I thought he was a pretty neat character to include in this talk. Gotta keep track. Okay, and then the story of Tor. Tor was Peter Worth's dog, and John Worth, sorry, and that's in one of the books on Tor was a great dog, an amazing dog. And when the army came in, he wasn't allowed, they kicked them out of where they were, and they were told to move into the apartment buildings, and the brand new apartment building they're building. So they tried to bring Tor with them, but Tor was a dog that was used to having roam. They could go anywhere he wanted every night and come back, and just had free reign of the whole of Pajarito Mountain. Well, he went to live in the apartment building. One of the boys in the apartment building would tease him, and he ended up biting him. So they said, you can't keep Tor. You're going to have to give him up. So he went to the Army, and he became one of the canine corps in the Army. And he ended up going to the South Pacific, seeing action in the South Pacific. And he died. And he's in the World War II Memorial for the Canine Corps in gratitude for being such a good and faithful dog. And then we have the warriors. Now remember, these are the people that came out of the Great Depression. They're used to not having much. So can you imagine living, and this is probably all the guys that lived here, of course they're drinking, but imagine this, imagine that, and this is downtown Los Alamos, where Central and Trinity meet, and at the crossroads there, and it's dirt, of course, and then the billeting houses. I mean, it's not a glamorous place to live, but that's where everybody lived, and that's where everybody survived. And these are the people that came out of the Great Depression who are used to not having hardly anything, and they ended up with that. And they were just great, amazing people. Betty Peters Brousseau, Brousseau Jim there at the middle school was named after her son who died. And he died of polio, I think, also, or the flu, something tragic. And he was very young, but he went to the middle school, junior high then. And that's how they named the gym after him. She was part of the graduating class of 1946. And she was the one, her and her classmates voted to name the school the Hilltoppers. And that's where it came from in 1946. And then there were the three friends. Okay, I think it's ready to go. It's ready to go. Hear me back there, Tammy? Perfect? Okay. Then there are three friends. These three friends, and I knew one of the guys really well, and I knew his son really well. There's Jim Bradbury, there's Brant Calkin, and Secadino Sandoval. All met in 1943 here in Los Alamos, and they were the graduating class of 1952. Jim's dad was Norris Bradbury, and Norris was the second lab director after Oppenheimer. And his son, Jim, became the director of the Mason Physics Facility. Brent's dad was the mathematician Jack Calkin, who worked with Feynman. And Brent later became the national president for the Sierra Club. And Secadino Sandoval became the nationally recognized award-winning watercolor painter. The Kiwanis Club asked him to design a medal for the 50th anniversary. They wanted a mushroom cloud as part of the design. Sacadino didn't want to do that. So he sketched the head of Oppenheimer with a dove behind it. And that's what we got now. And then one guy I have to throw out there, who Leslie and I went to school with, was Terry Wallace. He became the director of the laboratory, the 11th director after Oppenheimer. We were all proud of him that day. And then there's Edward Teller, Oppenheimer's betrayer. Now, we owned Tony's Pizza for a while, and he came in to eat there. And boy, there were hangers-on behind him, and let me kiss the ring of the Mr. Teller, and I don't know. I didn't like him. So Peter Oppenheimer, age 13, heard about what Teller had done to his dad and wrote on the school chalkboard, "The American government is unfair to accuse certain people that I know of being unfair to them. Since this is true, I think certain people, and may I say, only certain people in the U.S. government should go to hell. Yours truly, certain people." I thought that was pretty good. And then there have been 29 Nobel Prize winners who have worked at the lab. And what's surprising about that is Robert Oppenheimer is not one of them. He's not one of who won the Nobel Prize. But as retribution and acknowledgement for his contributions, and after the big Red Scare, President Kennedy was scheduled to present him with the 1963 Enrico Fermi Award. Enrico Fermi had died shortly after the Oppenheimer hearings from stomach cancer. President Kennedy would personally bestow the award in a formal ceremony at the White House on November 22nd. But on that afternoon, Kennedy was shot. A strange twist of fate. And that was the war years. Now here's some characters that I knew. Several people met and married their one and onlys here at Los Alamos while working on the bomb at the lab. Idalia, Eddie Bridge, and Jim Bridge. Eddie was a lab technician and supervisor. She made the detonators for the bomb. And Jim was a mechanical engineer, and he did measurements of the various bomb tests. Jean Nearson was one of the teachers here back then, and she's one of the teachers when I was here going to school and as a principal. And she was the teacher at Central School, and Judy has a real funny quote, real funny story about Jean Nearson, which you could probably tell people as we mill around afterward. And then she married and raised children here, and one of them was Kenny, who I graduated with, and he became a fighter pilot in the Navy. She retired in 1995. Roger and Jane Rasmussen married during the war. He died in 2017 after his wife of 62 years. He was the last surviving eyewitness of Trinity Site from Los Alamos. I think there was one other person that was there, but they didn't live in Los Alamos. And he was there, one of the last people alive that was actually at the Trinity Site explosion. And then we have some other special people that were here. Bill Hudson, he's on the top left corner. He was in the first wave at Iwo Jima. On 39 days later, he caught a grenade and was carried off the field. He was on the front line, never more than 100 yards away for that entire 39 days. He received a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for his heroic actions during that time. And he came here, and he's a coach at Los Alamos High School. And he's a famous swim coach, and he probably taught everyone my age how to swim. And you better not drown in his pool, because he'll kill you. And Steve Stoddard was a survivor of the Battle of the Bulge. He later became a senator, and he's right in the middle. He had a Purple Heart at the Battle of the Bulge. Now, what's neat about Steve is he would send some of the kids, and I was fortunate enough to be one, I don't know why, but he would send a birthday card to several kids, just say, "Happy birthday, Mike." I thought that was really neat of him. And then Joe Bologna, analytical chemist, he was in the test division of the atomic bomb. He later made wine in White Rock, New Mexico, Los Santos Wines, and it became really famous, and it was a neat place to go taste wine. And you needed to take all afternoon and find someone to drive you home afterwards. Now, what was interesting about his friendship during the war was he was friends with John Baudino, who was an FBI bodyguard for Enrico Fermi. And then there's Bob Cox, the war veteran, pro football player, coach at Los Alamos High School, a successful coach. He won the state football championship. He has that. He has a state basketball championship and a track championship. A multi-sport coach that never happens. And he's inducted in the New Mexico Athletic Association. And if you met Coach Cox, you would never know. And he would grab us by the ears, he'd grab us by the nose. If you were late, he'd say, "Put your nose in there, Katco." And he'd twist it hard. Parents could have sued him for it. No one ever did. That was just how we grew up, you know. And we loved Coach Cox. We loved him. And then there's Secadino Sandoval. Of course, we all know him. He went to church, and he was a really good friend, and I would have coffee with him at McDonald's, and he would tell all kinds of stories. One of them was how the road from the golf course was, and he's passed away, just passed away. And George Otto Biarchi. He was in the initial attack on Omaha Beach and later at Bastogne. He got a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, and we didn't even know his medals, the medals he had. He had them in a box, and Judy and I were growing up together. And after he died, we brought him out, and all these guys, they never talked about their experiences in World War II. Who would know, who could understand what they saw? And that's why they figured it. And it wasn't until they got older that they started telling stories, especially Coach Hudson. He didn't start telling that story, right, Sherry, until probably 10 years ago. He started talking about what had happened to him at Iwo Jima. And one of the interesting things, the day before he died, I went to his house. And he was telling me, "You know, Mike, I want to tell you a story, but you can't, it's politically incorrect. So you better not tell anybody." So I'm going to tell you guys. So he says, now every night we had passwords because the Japanese would come out of the caves and start killing with their knives and however they could do, and they would drag you out of your foxhole and then do awful things to you. And so he said, so we had passwords. And he goes, "You know the password that worked the best?" And they could never say it. Lollapalooza. None of them could say that word. Don't tell anybody that story. It was crazy. And George Biarchi later became Los Alamos school board member. Very famous. Dante Susco, and this is someone who never talked about the war, never ever, but he was a tank commander at the Battle of the Bulge. He got a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star, and he was a mathematician and a statistician at Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory. And then we'll go to White Rock. This is what White Rock looked like, if you can see it. This is State Road 4 going this way. This is Rover Boulevard. There's that intersection right there. And this is where my Uncle Max put the Chevron gas station. Now you notice the rock isn't there yet because it's 1966. Now it wasn't until 1968 that he was driving up around Bandelier, and this is where the story kind of gets mixed up, but we know that what happened is he found the rock. Let's just say that. He found the rock, and him and Cy Wanek, Wanek at that time owned the pharmacy there in White Rock, and that was right about here, Wanek's. And down here's Whackers, and this was Foodway, and this is the Peak. Peak was very famous. You could go there, if you could eat their banana split, Clyde remembers, if you could eat the banana split, they'd give it to you for free. And it was like 4 bananas and 12, huge banana split. And on that corner, and I'd totally forgotten about the phone booth being there. And you'd run over there and make a call, and it was kind of fun, What are you going to do in White Rock? And so Uncle Max found the rock, and he brought it and put it there. And he didn't bring it. Paul Parker brought it there. And he placed it there in 1968. And so Uncle Max got some white paint, and he painted it. And then over here, there's a place called the Pub. Jack Clifford and a bunch of guys used to go there and drink beer. They waited till Uncle Max closed the Chevron station. They went over there and they had some pink paint, and they put pink polka dots all over it. That was the first time they painted the White Rock. He got mad, painted it white, and that started the ball going. And so that's how the White Rock got in White Rock. And then there's all kinds of history. White Rock was started in 1946 when 1947, when the AEC contracted and bought out the Forest Service and bought White Rock, and they put little buildings there and little houses so people could build bombs. And at that time, we were building bombs left and right. Now, Norris wasn't supposed to, right? I think if the history serves me right, he wasn't. They said, just take care of stay there and make sure that people don't run. So he was in charge of the place for a little while, and they didn't really have any bomb building except under Norris's direction. They continued it, but not in big proportions. And it wasn't until like 50 or 51 when the Russians got the bomb, because of Klaus Fuchs. And they got the bomb, and then production started like crazy. But in 1953, they closed down White Rock. Nothing was going on, so they closed it down. And then it wasn't until 1962 that they started rebuilding White Rock. And this is in 66, all those buildings back there. This is Aztec Street. And the Spicocci's house, right in here, became the post office. And you bring your mail there, and you could go to the back door and get your mail from Mr. Spicocci or the kids or whoever was there. I mean, that was the post office down there in White Rock. And the White Rock right now is right here, right? Uncle Max. And then, of course, there were blue dot and red dot trails. The other thing that was kind of neat in White Rock during my time was from Overlook Park, you could see them filming the movie The Cowboys. This was in John Wayne. And he was down there, and we'd go there, run to the Overlook Park and say, that's him, I see him down there. It's 20 miles away, you're not going to see him. I'm serious, I saw John Wayne. And it didn't, so I thought that was kind of neat history back then. And there, at the time, the businesses in White Rock were the Peak, Speedway 7-Eleven, Whackers, Julian's Barbershop, Metzger's, and Slicks & Co. I worked at Slicks. In Los Alamos, we had Sparky's, the Shalico Shop, Taco Bell. We had a Taco Bell. The bowling alley and the Center Theater. And man, that area right over here was just awesome on Friday nights. I mean, I think every kid within 20 miles was over at the theater, the bowling alley, or at Sparky's every weekend night. So it was kind of neat. And then we have Peggy Pond Church, the daughter of Ashley Pond. Her dad was a former Rough Rider for Teddy Roosevelt. And he moved her to Pajarito in 1914. And it was with him that they started the ranch school in 1917. Edith Warner, the woman at Ottawee Crossing, was hired by A.J. Connell to receive shipments from the ranch school and keep them safe until they could be picked up. She opened a tea room on the premises with the scientists Oppenheimer, and the visitors were Oppenheimer, Niels Bohr, Enrico Fermi, Hans Bethe, Ernest Lawrence, Robert Bacher, Richard Feynman. All had standing reservations at her tea room. I just can't believe it. Imagine the evening conversations in that room during 1945 and 46 and 47. And that she was privy to. And speaking of Feynman, so this is Richard Feynman's first wife, Arlene. And I think it was the love of his life. And on the right is Klaus Fuchs. And in the middle is his car, Fuchs' car. In 1942, Arlene and Richard were married, and he was recruited by Oppenheimer to come here in 43. Arlene contracted tuberculosis, and they took the train out to Los Alamos, and she was in a wheelchair at the time of their first wedding anniversary. Feynman was assigned to work with Hans Bethe, who had a house 5 houses down, and he came up with a way to measure, the two of them came up to a way to measure the yield of the fission bombs. On June 16th, Richard got word that Arlene was in bad shape in the hospital. He borrowed Fuchs' car, and every weekend for months, he'd drive down to be with her in the hospital. But on that day, on June 16th, she died. He threw himself back into his work. This is June 1945, and he never left the office until the bomb was blown in Trinity. He just couldn't get over her, I don't think, anyway. And he was at the Trinity site blast. Now, one of the things about Feynman is he was a real character. When he first came up here, he figured out a way, and he said, our security's terrible. I can walk into any office and get into the filing cabinet and steal papers, whatever I want. I said, no, you can't. Get out of here. Well, he was young then, and so what he would do is tip it back and then reach up behind and pull files out. And they said, and then he would leave them there for them in the morning, and what? They'd all be scared. So one of the guys that he did that to was Teller, and Teller was saying everything's fine. I don't put it in there anyway. I put it in my desk drawer. So he figured out a way to get in there and pull all his private papers out of there. All of the experiments he was working on, the hydrogen bomb then. And he's pulling them all out. And then he went to him, followed him to his office. And when he got there, he said, so do you got anything in your top drawer? And I want to see what you're working on. Why don't you show me? And so he opened up the top drawer and Teller looked at it. He goes, I think you know what's in the drawer. It's hard to pull anything over on a smart man, he said. So that was Feynman. And then afterwards, when Fuchs was questioned, he was saying the person that's really the spy is Feynman. He used to leave every weekend with my car, and he was in all through the lab stealing all these secret documents. He was giving them to all the people in Albuquerque. He tried to, Anyway, I'll hold my breath over that. And that was and he was at the Trinity site. So then, Peggy Pond Church. The honking geese winging southward toward the winter homes, the Montachinas dancing on Christmas Day, jars and jams shelled for homemade bread, the larder stocked with for the long winter storms, and letters Peggy received telling her of her great friend's slow demise. Dear Peggy, Edith Warner had an operation today, which proved to be unsuccessful. I thought you'd like to know. Love, Dorothy McKibben. And then she died. They were friends for 20, 30 years. Deep, good friends. So Peggy wrote a poem to her friend. It's called Requiem for Edith. I won't read the whole thing, I'll just read the ending. It's hard to say what you have been to us. Live now within us like a spring of clear water. Be present in your garden like a gentle ghost. Let us often find you there under the drowsy shadow of ancient people where the green lettuce sprouts, and old Tolano kneels to coax the water among the long rows of ripening berry. Tell us you have forgotten the long anguish of dying, that it was, after all, only the seed splitting from its hard shell, and against all the earth's weight, bursting at last into the light of the immortal summer. Her soul at last enjoying that immortal summer. Thank you very much for coming out tonight. Thank you. So So this is a cause that I'm close to and working with 8 northern pueblos. The rash of murdered, missing indigenous women, native women are just disappearing at alarming rates. And so I donate some money to them. Their symbol is the red hand over their face. And so, if you want. But anyway, that's one of my causes. And then I'd stand for questions if you want. Or I'll sign some books. Thank you so much for coming out. I really appreciate everything you've done. Todd and the Historic Society, everybody. Yes, Lynn?
How's the next book coming?
It's good. I keep getting sidetracked with White Rock and all the things that are happening but it's coming. It's coming along. Yes, Marv?
Hang in there.
Thanks, Lee.
When we had Tony's, or worked at Tony's, that Russ, your brother-in-law, used to bring me Hans back.
Yeah, Han,
They used to have lunch all the time.
well, that was, yeah. Well, Mrs. Baker, who lived right here, she used to come down about 2 o'clock in the afternoon by herself. And this was 1989, 1990. She was still alive then. And she'd walk down to Tony's and by herself have a slice of pizza and Coke and just sit there at 2 o'clock and read her book. And finally I got enough guts to go, hey, hi, how you doing? And they go, so you from around here? Yeah. I was married to Richard Baker, the famous guy. Oh, wow, you live, wow, So then we had some talks, but she didn't really like to talk about the war years. She just liked to talk about how nice the weather was in her garden. It was pretty neat, pretty neat. This is a beautiful place to be, I swear. Yes?
So as someone who's not from this area,
Right.
can you give me a feel for after the war years, kind of what percentage of people stayed here who had been working on the project? Obviously it cut down significantly, but.
Right. It was a big mass exodus of the scientists. Almost all of them left. Norris was assigned here, and it was basically an army camp. And he was assigned here to keep it going, but not really do anything, just be in charge of the army camp. So it was mostly army soldiers, the guards, the cooks, the local people that came over from all. And then about the 50s is when the bomb building began, and they were really building bombs then. So it was a lot of people, but the scientists had really left by then. Yeah. Right. Any other questions? And yes, Leslie.
Well, let me just make a comment. Before I retired, I worked with a guy, I don't remember his name, but I could look it up. But they had a project where they drilled down onto the rock, the White Rock, and took out a sample. And I have this really long piece of paper that shows all the different little layers. Have you ever seen that?
I have seen it,
You have seen it? Okay.
I have seen it. Yeah.
It's awesome.
They did a core drill of the.
Thank you. I couldn't
It's
think of the right word.
you're right. Layers and layers of paint, just layers, and 20 years of paint, 30 years of paint, almost every weekend, huh?
45 years.
45 years now. That's right. 68, right? Yeah. Right. Someone do math for me real quick. But anyway, thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming out. Let me part it out.